Hey, what's happening, everybody? I'm not doing so great today. My kid was awake all damn night. The brain, you guys know how I've been like mostly saying the words that I've intended to say over the last I don't know how many months. Knock on whatever. Like I haven't had a cold since February, I think. I should have known something was coming, some weird sleep thing. I think my younger son had a bad dream. It's hard to say. My wife went in there, tried to get him to go back to sleep. That didn't work. Then I did it. Then she did it again. And finally, we were like, get out of your bedroom. You're going to wake up your older brother. And some 2 hours later, we all went back to sleep. And so, yeah, we're doing great here in the Bespers household today. But luckily, here on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball, I have another amazing guest. And that's going to take a lot of the burden off of me to say the words I intend to in the proper order. There's no reason to wait around. We're doing this one live today, baby. Raphielle Johnson of RotoWorld fame. Save me from myself. Good day to you, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Sounds like you had a rather eventful overnight. So, hopefully we make this an easy conversation for you.
Oh,
Avoid
yeah.
the fatigue.
Every conversation is easy. I don't know what you're talking about. So what's going on, man? How's life? How's everything at the big RW?
We're doing well. We're end of season content, kind of wrapping things up from a fancy standpoint. A little bit of a look ahead to next year as well. So, yeah, just kind of looking to see how these playoffs shake out. Obviously, we already have one finalist in the Celtics. Who they'll play, I think the odds favor Dallas, but Minnesota did manage to extend that series to a fifth game last night. So
The gentleman's sweep still on the table for the Mavericks.
yeah,
By the way, you guys can follow at Raphielle J, RAPHIELLEJ on Twitter. I would strongly suggest everybody goes and does that post haste. But so before I even get into because we're going to ask Raf for his lessons this year, but before we even get into that, this is a weird time of year, right? For fantasy enthusiasts, it's generally kind of the diehards right now. What is your typical process after a regular season ends? And there's this, first there's the gap. There's like a 2-month gap between the end of the regular season and the draft. Then you got free agency, and then things kind of pick up from there a little bit. What do you do during these months to kind of keep the brain locked in on fantasy basketball, if you even can, really?
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of figuring out what I can take away. Going back and looking at how teams played out in terms of the rotations and who played how many minutes, what positions, and all that. Try to figure that out a little bit, because you're also trying to forecast what potential changes may come along with free agency trades. Who gets drafted where. But I think kind of a recap more than anything. You're kind of also playing a little bit of catch up in terms of the draft because for a lot of us, you don't really know too much outside of the big names. Usually those big names are guys who play deep into the NCAA tournament. That's kind of where you kind of start. You may have some international guys like Zachary Rissache who's still playing, as a matter of fact. So some of those lottery international prospects, but I don't know. Your brain's kind of scattered, and after a long season, you're kind of looking for a little bit of a rest in there as well. It kind of, you know,
Yeah.
you need even diehards need to take a break.
Yeah. You know what? So I just had this conversation with Dan Palio last week, who segues right from basketball into baseball and from baseball into football. I don't understand. I can't do that. My brain needs this processing period after the season ends. These multi-sport lunatics are out of their mind.
Yeah, more power to them. If you love it, you enjoy it, go for it. But I think I'm more of a baskpball guy than anything. So
same. Thunder Dan, you're nuts. If you're tuning in, you're a crazy person. All right, Raf, what do you got? What's something you took away from this season as you've been sort of reflecting on it, and then we can see how deep we can dive on each of one of however far we get on these things. That's where we'll go.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a takeaway so much as trying to look at rookies other than Victor Wembanyama, because I think for a lot of us, he's that 1-1 pick going into drafts next year. But what happens behind him in terms of this year's rookie class? I think Chet Holmgren, he's someone that I think is he someone you roll the dice on with a late first round pick in a standard league draft, or do you wait until the second round? I think that's an interesting question. Another would be Brandon Miller. After from January 1st onward, he was a top 100 player in 9-cat formats. So it's like you look at that roster in Charlotte, traded PJ Washington and Gordon Hayward. Obviously, I think the deck is kind of cleared for Brandon Miller to kind of take off even more than he did after the new year. And also, you have the Miles Bridges situation that'll impact him with regard to free agency. So I think looking at those two rookies would be something that I would. I'm trying to take a little more time to kind of figure out this summer myself, and I kind of want to know your thoughts on those two guys in terms of their fantasy potential going into next season.
Yeah, sure. So, it's funny that Chet comes back up again. He's a pretty hot topic right now on fantasy circles.
Yeah.
Last Friday, on a show with Matt Smith, he was talking about the risks associated with taking a guy, and Chet ended up being kind of the poster child of this, of someone who's decent at a lot of stuff and then
Hmm.
massive at one thing. And for him, obviously, the big thing this last year was blocks. So then there's this question of like, what if that category dries up the way that it did for, say, Jaren Jackson Jr. this last year? Uh, Everybody that listens to my shows knows that I'm more of a roto guy than head to head.
Hmm.
And I think with roto, Chet is an easier kind of early pill to swallow in that
Yeah.
you don't need, with head to head, you're generally hunting like 5 or 6 ultra powerhouse categories. You don't care if somebody's
Hmm.
bad at 2 or 3, you want to load up. And in roto, there's more of a benefit of having someone
Yeah.
who doesn't hurt you in 5 or 6 things and then is good in a few as well. I don't think I'm going Chet in the first. I think that would
Hmm.
be too early. I mean, he finished at number 22 per game in 9-cat this year, ended up being exceptionally durable, which was nice. That was sort of like the big question mark, I think, for him coming
Yeah.
into it. Even if the blocks taper off a little bit, it still feels like he has kind of an easy path into the top 40 just because he is kind of in that Porzingis build for
Hmm.
unicorn-ish, unicorn
Yeah.
adjacent, I guess. Um, so I don't mind Chet in the 25 range. I don't think I would shoot for forward progress for him, because I don't know
Hmm.
that like with big men, you just never really know if they're going to get more shots because someone has
Yeah.
to get them the basketball for them to get the attempts at the bucket. And then with Brandon Miller, to me, that one is a much harder question to answer. I realized my long-winded answer to Chet sounded like that was the hard one, but it's not.
Hmm.
Because I don't have a clue what Charlotte's doing between now and opening night. Like, I don't know if they're gonna be a player in free agency at all, if they're still leaning into more rebuildery. Uh, will LaMelo Ball ever make it through a season again? Like, there's all these things that hang in the balance of, "Oh, this is how much Brandon Miller gets to do in a given year." But you're right, though, when he got sort of the chains came off in the second half of the year, and it was like, look, this is basically your team now. Take 20 shots a
Hmm.
night. He was solid because that much usage, you're going to be able to do something with it. So that one to me is one we almost can't really answer right now. It
Yeah.
feels a little too early, but with Chet, I think, like, to me, maybe he could take a small step forward, but I'm actually kind of worried about him taking a small step back if the Thunder address their rebounding deficiencies. Does that hurt him in any capacity? Or maybe he just gets stronger and he's part of that, but
Mhm.
I don't know. That's where I sit on that one. Is this so uh sort of pinging it back into your direction here? This is a second year discussion in general, and is this something that you do annually, kind of looking at how rookies did, and if there's some guys that might be almost like a post hype type, and guys that hit their mark? Because I actually was big in on Holmgren
Mhm.
this year, and now I'm
Yeah.
like, maybe we cashed in this first season. So is this part of your annual kind of trajectory?
Yeah, because, as I said earlier, a lot of things can change. As you mentioned, there are a lot of variables at play with both of these guys. I think with Chet Holmgren, one of the variables is, does Oklahoma City add a functional big man to that rotation? Like we saw them sign Bismack Biyombo, but he didn't play. I think he'll be a free agent. Mike Muscala was in a similar situation there. I hope this doesn't happen, but outside of the Knicks, there have been some betting projections that Isaiah Hartenstein is someone that, Oklahoma City could be a nice landing spot for him. And if that happens, do they get Chet more minutes at the four? And then you're kind of looking at a domino effect on Jalen Williams if he moves up to the three. So I think if there's one thing to take away from Oklahoma City's playoff run, it's that Josh Giddey doesn't really fit that rotation.
Mm.
We saw him play less than 15 minutes per game in the second round, seeing more of guys like Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, and Cason Wallace, another rookie. So you kind of wonder what's going to happen with him. And then if they sign a big man who could potentially play next to Chet, what does that how does that change the starting lineup, if anything? So that's one thing. Something I forgot to mention with Miller, he's got a new head coach as well. Charles Lee, assistant coach with the Celtics. He'll be making that move after they finish their playoff run, obviously. But that's another factor to consider here. But it feels like signing a first-time head coach, you're kind of all in on a rebuild. Like we've seen LaMelo struggle with injuries. He's on a hefty contract, but it feels like they're going to try to set everything up to see how far Brandon Miller can kind of take things for them. So I think if we're thinking about it, if we're looking to reach on either of those guys, I think I would lean towards reaching for Miller as opposed to Holmgren, just because, like you mentioned, there's only so far you can reach with Chet Holmgren. He's a top 25 player this year. How much further can you go in year two? As for Miller, top 100 after New Year's, do you roll the dice on him like a top 75 pick? And is that even much of a gamble with him, to be honest with you?
Yeah, and as I had a few thoughts that were kind of banging around in my head on all this
Mhm.
stuff. If you, I think Brandon Miller missed a little bit of time in
Yeah.
March. Was it February or
Mhm.
March? I can't even remember. And in his games around that, he was actually more of a kind of 50-60 range guy. So we saw those little
Yeah.
glimpses of it when he was averaging 20 points a game, 4 boards, a steal. His field goal percent was up to 47 instead of 44. And I don't know how much that is sort of small sample size theater, or if that's kind of the, okay, what if things do continue to move in the right direction? We got just that little glimpse of it last year. And yeah, I think I'm actually inclined to agree with you, which I know for a lot of people that listen to my shows, like, wait, really? You're more on that? But like, I think we've seen, and this is kind of how I felt about Evan Mobley for a couple of years. Everybody keeps
Mhm.
telling me like, you got to go get him like in the 20s or 30s or whatever it is. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, but that's maxing it out at that point.
Mhm.
There isn't anywhere for him to go if you draft Evan Mobley at 35, because now I don't know what's going to happen with Garland and Donovan Mitchell, but as long as both of those guys were there, Mobley wasn't going to get more than 11 or 12 shots per ball game.
Yeah.
And that's what he needed to take another step forward. And I feel kind of similarly about Holmgren. He was at 11.7 shots. What was Mobley was at 11.3. It's the same thing with these big guys that are not the primary offensive focal point. They get what's kind of left. And I
Mhm.
don't mean that for that to be a slight on either of those dudes. They're amazing basketball players, but other guys just have the ball before them. So can Chet Holmgren get to 20 points per game? Yeah, I mean, he could, but they're going to have to force feed him, get him up to 13, 14 shots a game instead of 11 and a half. And I don't know if we can bank on that happening. Whereas with Brandon Miller, all throughout this last season, and you already talked about it, just after the new year, like basically like every month, his role grew as more and more
Yeah.
bodies on that
Mhm.
team went down. But that was semi by design a little bit. So if they lean into
Mhm.
the rebuild, then there may be a little bit of value there. And certainly on the head to head side, where I guess the only fear is if they tank again, how many times can that team lose? I guess a lot is the answer.
Yeah.
Is there any fear of for Brandon Miller down the stretch, or do you think it's one of those situations where he's young enough that he might just play through it anyway?
I think we'll play through it. To answer your question earlier, you missed one game in March and two in January. So he's pretty much healthy that second half of the season. And I don't think Charlotte is at a point where they can afford to shut down a young player like Miller if they struggle again. They need those guys to get as many reps as they can. Um, Because I don't see the point. I don't see what you gain as a rebuilding franchise from shutting guys down that you think can be a part of your future. You kind of, how are you building a winning culture where you're, I wouldn't say incentivizing losing, but you're kind of just saying, don't worry about it. We'll come back later. And I don't think they can afford to do that. And I think their fan base has watched that for long enough. So yeah, I don't see that happening. So yeah, I think Miller, yeah, like I said, he's the one that I would be willing to take more of a chance on in terms of draft positioning. And I do have a takeaway from this season for myself is that we should be careful not to read too much into post trade deadline production. And I say this specifically in relation to Mikal Bridges, because if you recall, when he got to Brooklyn last year, he took off. He was able to he flourished in an expanded role compared to what he had in Phoenix, and he had a rather lofty ADP. I think he top 20 for a lot of people, and that proved to be too much. Obviously, other factors in Brooklyn didn't help him at all. He was still a top 100 player, but we're kind of used to him being like a top 50, top 60 guy. So I think my takeaway is that what we see from like a 25, 30 game sample size isn't guaranteed to be the same thing that we see from a 75 to 80 game sample size.
What about okay, so I have two questions now, and I kind of want to
Uh,
figure what order to ping them to you in. Um, on the topic you just brought up, and then I want to come back to a couple of names of possible second year guys that I want to get your opinion on as well. But I
okay.
also don't want to keep you here forever. So who are the cautionary or possible winning type tales that you'd come that may have surfaced this past year? Like who are the guys? And I guess there weren't that many
Yeah,
huge moves
this
at the
was a
deadline this year.
yeah, this was kind of a quiet trade deadline, so to speak. Like we didn't have too many. Like the biggest names moved well before then. We talk about
Yeah.
Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby. Um, so I don't know if there are going to be too many examples in this year's trade deadline. Like Daniel Gafford is a 6th round player after the trade deadline. I don't think he can sustain that going into next season, not just because of the minutes, not just because of playing full 82, but also you got Derek Lively the second there. And I think his role is only going to expand as he continues to mature as a player. So I think he would be someone that his post deadline production, I wouldn't expect that going into next season.
What about a couple of other second year guys? This is where I
Okay.
wanted to go from the last one. I love that we had like a mid show segue there. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
Talk to Raphaelle Johnson, by the way, for those that are listening after the fact, of the fabulous RotoWorld, Raphaelle J on Twitter. So you talked a little bit about Wemby, who we sort of zipped past because, like, what
I
else are you
mean,
going to say
what
about Wemby?
more? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
what else can you do there? Holmgren, who was
Mhm.
sort of like a second-year rookie, and then Brandon Miller. But there were a number of other rookies this year that had relatively high ADPs that then either dramatically underperformed or came on kind of late. I'm curious what you think folks should be trying to do with someone like a Scoot in Portland, because
Mhm.
he got the keys late in the season and the assist numbers were massive, but the efficiency was yikes.
Yeah.
And then you had Amin Thompson in Houston, who ended up with a huge roll down the stretch and put up monster fantasy numbers. And then Asar Thompson in Detroit, who
Mhm.
started the season really strong and then kind of ran out of gas about a month into the year and never really refilled the tank from that point forward. Uh, those were, and then you also mentioned Derek Lively, by the way.
Mhm.
So maybe Lively's not the one that we need to cover right now. Uh, is there any opportunity with either of the Thompsons or with Scoot this coming year for not even necessarily post hype for Amon Thompson, because he was good
Mhm.
down the stretch, but do you think anybody maybe missed that, didn't notice how good he was late? And then is there a chance that Detroit Thompson, I'll just go by team here, or Scoot, do they get
Yeah.
underdrafted with a chance to take a step forward second year. How do you deal with players like that had kind of like a weird, almost sine wavy kind of season?
Mhm. Yeah, of those three you mentioned, I really like Amen Thompson going into next year. Now, obviously, the injury to Tari Eason did clear out some room for him. Also, the beyond that, Alperen Şengün getting hurt, but I think he brings enough to the table in categories outside of points when we talk about rebounding, secondary playmaking, some defensive stats, to where he can be a valuable guy in fantasy leagues going into next season. His twin brother concerns me, not just because of his production tailing off, but that situation in Detroit just proved to be an abject disaster.
Yeah.
And I know they're making some changes with the front office. I think they're bringing in Trajan Langdon as their lead executive above, I forget his name, but he was
So Troy Weaver still is
Troy. Yeah, Troy Weaver's still the GM, but he's going to have a boss now, which is
right.
probably good. But you still have the Monty Williams factor, and they clearly need to let Alcer, Marcus Sasser, those guys need to play through their issues, whatever they may be within a game, to figure out what they have there. I mean, he brought Jaden Ivey off the bench for a significant portion of the season. Like, what? Come on,
Yeah.
you know.
Are we rebuilding? What are we even doing here?
There,
We're
yeah,
losing either way.
there's attempting to teach lessons, and then there's whatever happened up there. So I don't really know. I think that would be my bigger concern for Alcer. Scoot Henderson, the efficiency, like you mentioned, was brutal. He had some really good assist nights down the stretch, especially once Anthony Simons was out for the season. But man, he's one that I really need to see operate in summer league before I make a decision on him, because if he can clean up the efficiency, obviously summer league players aren't the same as the guys you'll see from October onward. But I think if he can clean up the efficiency there, I'd feel a bit better about him in drafts going into next season than I do right now, because between the turnovers and the poor shooting, that's just a little too much to take on in terms of, like, say, a top 100 pick, maybe a late round flyer or something like that. Excuse me, but I think that would probably be the most I'd be willing to put forth on Scoot right now.
Yeah, the Scoot thing is incredibly confusing because
Yeah.
if you think he could potentially take a step forward, you're like, all right, well, I can probably get him ultra late,
Mhm.
but like, holy moly, the numbers were crazy late in the season in particular. I mean, we had
Mhm.
a 15 assist game but 8 turnovers that same
Yeah.
night. He had a 12 assist game. The next ball game, he had 9 turnovers in that one. I mean, he was basically around 5 or 6 turnovers a game when he finally kind of had the keys to the car late in the season. And I
Mhm.
get it. If you're punting turnovers, that's a different thing. If you're punting turnovers and field goal percent, that's also a different thing. So he
Yeah.
he seems like he profiles as kind of that you can sort of if the square peg if you need that exact shaped peg for your
Mhm.
head-to-head team, but I don't know how you could possibly get anywhere near him on the roto side. That's like
Yeah.
that drags you down in multiple categories that you just can't possibly recover from. Um, so that yeah, I don't know. I was curious about those key players because is there any kind of post type thing going on, or is it just too messy? And it sounds like you're leaning a little bit towards the too messy side. We've heard rumors, and this will be my last question for you before I
Mhm.
actually let you have your day. We've heard rumors from the Houston camp that they're looking to try to move their pick to go get another kind of bona fide NBA player. Is
Yeah.
that the kind of thing that would maybe sour you on guys like Eason or Thompson?
Oh yeah, because I think you look at that roster, um, where they're probably going to look for a proven player would be on the wings. Like, obviously, I have Dylan Brooks, but as good as Jalen Green was down the stretch, I think there's still some consistency issues there. And for a
You
team
think?
that, yeah, yeah, they
Just a
came,
little bit.
they hung around even after the Şengün injury, longer than a lot of us expected them to. So credit to those guys for that. But I think getting a wing scorer, if they're looking to add someone proven to that rotation, would probably be what they try to do. So I think in that case, Eason and Thompson can still have roles within the rotation, obviously, but that would knock them down the peg fantasy wise. And who knows, a team may want one of those guys in return for a trade because they both have promise, as we've
Yeah, I
seen,
would.
when healthy. So I wouldn't be shocked if Houston tried to go that route. They would possibly have to part with one of those guys in a trade.
If I was another team, I would freaking
Yeah.
love those guys. Ahmed
Hmm.
Thompson looked amazing down the stretch
Yeah.
this last year. Ralph, what do you got going on that you can promote here on the pod?
Well, we got more end of season content. We're doing a rundown of all 30 teams from a fantasy standpoint. This morning, my column on the Sacramento Kings published, so that's out
Ooh,
for your reading pleasure.
I have a question.
Yeah, beyond the top three of Sabonis, Fox, and Keegan Murray, wasn't too much for me to like in fantasy this year. But
Can I ask you one question on that? I
yeah,
haven't looked
definitely.
at it yet. What do you think about Keon Ellis going forward?
I like him. He played extremely well down the stretch. The injuries to Kevin Herter and Malik Monk kind of cleared the deck for him in terms of opportunities. And even before that, he leapfrogged Davion Mitchell in terms of those backup point guard minutes. So he's someone that I think if they lose Malik Monk in free agency, and they're gonna have to pay a good amount of money to keep him, maybe I don't know if he's a lock to be like a late round guy, but
Right.
he's someone that you can probably be able to justify if they lose some players. And also the West is only going to get stronger. Memphis will be healthy. Trying to think of, who knows what
Spurs
the
be a
Warriors.
little better.
Yeah, obviously the Spurs, you add a stable point guard to that rotation with Wemby and what he showed. That's another team that could possibly, make a leap. Utah is now looking to accelerate their rebuild. What that looks like, we don't know yet. But Sacramento's that team. You also had the Mike Brown contract situation. They broke
Mhm.
off talks of an extension. He's heading into his final guaranteed year. You know,
How do you
that
mess
could.
that? Please don't mess that up, Kings. What are you doing? Just
I,
just get
Look,
it
man.
done.
As a fan of a team where you kind of hope that the owner kind of stays out of the way as he has, I can tell you exactly how they can potentially mess that up. So
Fair. Okay. I'll allow it. Rob, thank you so much for taking time today to hop on the show. I really appreciate it.
all right, thanks for having me.
He is Raphielle Johnson of RotoWorld at Raphielle J. If you want to give him a follow over on social media. God, I love talking to other people. I know it feels like I say it like it's a low bar kind of thing to do, but it's just not something that I had the time or resources to do for the last few years. And that's been one of the big things that I've wanted to focus on here in the move over to the Old Man Squad Sports Network and Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. It's just getting an opportunity to talk to other folks. And I got to tell you, just again, on the pull back the curtain side of things, I do way less. Why wouldn't I like that? My off seasons were, they still are. I shouldn't say were, but so much pouring through. Okay, what happened here? And maybe I could do a better job of writing stuff down as it hits me during the season. But there's so much going on that's just not a top priority. So when I get to the end of the regular season, it's something that in March, forget March, November, I was like, oh yeah, I should remember to talk about that at the end of the season. I don't remember to talk about that at the end of the season. It's gone. Whew, straight out. Especially I have nights where I don't sleep, like this one. So these shows that I've been able to do the last couple of weeks and will continue throughout the offseason, talking to Raphielle Johnson today and talking to, the list now, Dan Titus yesterday, last week, Dan Palio, Matt Smith, Josh Lloyd. We're going to be talking to Mike Barner. That'll be for tomorrow's show. I think we'll have Alex Rickleen on the Friday episode of the podcast. And there's just a laundry list. My good buddy Keith Cork over at Ethos. There's probably 15, 20 other guests that I'm going to get on the show here. And then we'll cycle through them a few times because they have things that they were watching from this year that landed on their brain that maybe didn't land on mine. And the second year situation is a really good topic covered today. How does that work? Is there an opportunity for kind of post-hype value? which Brandon Miller is an interesting question mark on that, because do people look at his overall season numbers? Do they look at the numbers when he was kind of the only player there? Does the public look at some kind of weird in between on him? I honestly don't know yet. With Holmgren, you know he's going to be drafted high next year because he was just a win all season long. Thank goodness. That was the sort of one shot we took this last year, and Chet was that one panned out, luckily. But what about the Thompsons, like we just talked about? What if Detroit leans into Oscar Thompson? Is that going to be a thing? Does Houston have room for Amen when everybody comes back next year? Şengün being out was a great point. I brought up Keon Ellis because he's not a rookie. He's a second-year guy who played very, very, very little in his rookie season, sparingly at most. But then what if the Kings clear out some space? What if Herter's not a part of the future? What if Monk doesn't re-sign? Like Raph mentioned. Lot to think about. I also like the way that we've now had, and these analysts have not discussed any of this with one another, someone like a Holmgren has come up on kind of two different angles towards next year, which with Matt Smith back on Friday, he was like, look, I don't think I can, especially on the head-to-head side, Matt, more of a head-to-head dude than Roto. Roto, there's a little bit more of a case to be made for guys that have that more specialist-y type appeal, but it is very hard to build around those dudes if you got to take them with a top 25 pick. A little bit of an arbitrary cutoff there. I get it, but you guys know generally where I'm going with that. But Matt was saying, could I take Chet Holmgren super early? Probably not, because with head-to-head, you want to get positives in multiple categories from your first few round picks. And with Raph, he's talking about, okay, does Holmgren have anywhere to go up from where he was this year? Could he be better than top 25? Could he get inside the top 20, top 15? He was inside the first round for a while, although I think we kind of knew that was going to taper off. Free throw percent fell under 80%. Field goal 52.5 is, I mean, like the percentages feel pretty repeatable for him, although I don't know that they necessarily go up. And so then you're like, all right, this guy needs more shots. And if anything, OKC is going to bring in other big men because they were weak on the glass, and their young guys are going to continue to develop. Shea can't really take many more shots, and he was taking 20 shots and 9 free throws, but more for Jalen Williams, more for, I don't know, do we see Cason Wallace get more of a role? A lot to think about with these guys. A lot to think about with these dudes. Quickly here, before we hit the end of the program, I want to remind all of you guys, I don't think I did it sort of a traditional intro because I wanted to get into the guest segment as fast as possible today. I am Dan Bespris. You can follow me at Dan Bespris on Twitter. This, of course, is Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball, an Old Man Squad Sports Network presentation. And I would kindly ask those of you that are watching on social media, please subscribe somewhere else also. Whether it's YouTube, if you want video, a lot of the stuff is going to be on YouTube this year, especially as we roll towards draft season, but not everything. For instance, the Matt Smith Show on Friday. Matt doesn't have video set up. So that's an audio-only podcast. And I was thrilled to do it that way. That's not going to be the only time that happens. Not just with Matt, on other situations where if I've got kids banging around behind this cardboard draft board behind me, I'm going to do an audio show. My younger son is off school next week. My older son is off school for the summer, the week after that. They've got camps blended in there, but they're not every day, and they don't start as early. So there are going to be a lot of shows where I'm wedging in little chunks on the audio side and mushing them together. The magic of editing. So please go subscribe someplace else if you could. If you've been enjoying these shows, and if you've been a long-time listener or viewer of the pods that I've done, please drop a 5-star review. That's also super useful as we build back up from El Scratch. Nothing. Zippo. 0. It's weird to start all the way back at the bottom. We had climbed most of a mountain, and then we thought, go back to the bottom of the mountain. Let's do it again. Thanks again to Raphielle Johnson for jumping on today. That is your program back tomorrow, as we mentioned, with Mike Barner. Make sure to stay tuned for that. This is Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm Dan Bespris. I will see you again tomorrow. So long for now.